It all started on an ordinary morning commute. I was sitting on the bus, scrolling through my phone, when I felt someone staring at me. I glanced up and locked eyes with a man sitting just across the aisle. His gaze didn't falter, he didn't look away, not even for a second. Uneasy, I gave him a polite smile and turned back to my phone, pretending not to notice. Moments later, he leaned closer and said something strange. "You look familiar. I think we've met before." I hadn't seen him in my life, but his tone was calm, almost hypnotic. The rest of the ride was unbearable. His eyes never left me. When I got off at my stop, I thought I'd left him behind. But as I walked toward my apartment, I caught a glimpse of him again standing at the corner watching me. My heart raced. Was he following me? Or was I imagining things? That night, I tried to brush it off. People are weird sometimes, right? But deep down, something didn't feel right. Little did I know, that brief encounter wasn't the end of it. It was just the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt me for months. A week passed, and I almost forgot about him. But then, strange things began happening. I'd leave for work in the morning and notice footprints in the dirt outside my window, footprints that hadn't been there the night before. At first, I thought they belonged to a delivery guy or maybe a stray cat, but they kept appearing every morning, always in the same spot. One night I came home late from work. As I turned the corner toward my apartment, I felt a chill run down my spine. There he was, the man from the bus standing under the streetlight, just a block away. He wasn't looking at me directly, but I knew he saw me. His presence was enough to make my hands tremble as I fumbled with my keys and locked the door behind me. I told myself it was a coincidence, that I was being paranoid. But that night, as I lay in bed, I heard faint footsteps outside my window. My blinds were shut, but I knew someone was out there. My breathing quickened. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police, but then the footsteps stopped. Silence. I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. Over the next month, the unease became unbearable. I started noticing small, unsettling details. My trash cans were moved. My front door lock felt loose, as if someone had been tampering with it. And then, the notes began. Slips of paper left on my car windshield, each one blank except for a single word scrawled in messy handwriting. Soon. I stopped sleeping. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind, sent me into a panic. I started keeping a knife by my bed. One night, I finally broke and called the police, but without any solid proof, there was nothing they could do. Then, something happened that made my blood run cold. I was getting ready for bed when my phone buzzed with a notification, a picture message. I froze as I opened it. It was a photo of me, taken through my living room window. My curtains had been closed all night, or so I thought. My knees gave out, and I sank to the floor. He wasn't just watching me, had been inside my house. My sanctuary wasn't safe anymore. I had no idea how far he was willing to go, but I was too terrified to find out. I couldn't take it anymore. I installed cameras around my house, but they only heightened my fear. Every night, I watched the footage, hoping for nothing, dreading everything. And then, one night, I saw him. He was standing in my driveway, staring at my front door, motionless. He stayed there for over an hour before disappearing into the darkness. The police were called again, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. They suggested I stay somewhere else for a while, but I refused. This was my home. I wasn't going to let him drive me out. But that decision nearly cost me my life. A week later, I woke up to a noisy, faint clicking sound coming from the living room. My heart pounded as I crept down the hallway, clutching the knife I kept under my pillow. I turned the corner and froze. The front door was wide open, swinging gently in the night breeze. And then I saw him. He was standing in the doorway, smiling. "You should have left when you had the chance," he whispered. My scream caught in my throat as he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Time slowed as he lunged at me. I stumbled backward, slashing wildly with the knife. He was faster, stronger, but I fought like my life depended on it because it did. His hands closed around my throat, and I felt the air leave my lungs. Desperation took over. I clawed at his face, kicked at his legs, anything to break free. In a moment of sheer panic, I grabbed a lamp from the side table and smashed it against his head. He staggered, giving me just enough time to run. I bolted out the door and into the street, screaming for help. Lights flicked on in my neighbors' houses, and within minutes, the police arrived. They found him unconscious in my living room, blood dripping from his head. As they dragged him away, he turned to look at me one last time. "This isn't over," he hissed, a twisted smile spreading across his face. I collapsed onto the curb, shaking uncontrollably. It was over, for now, but his words echoed in my mind. This isn't over. I didn't know if he'd come back, but I knew one thing for sure: me life would never be the same again. It's been 6 months since that night, and I still sleep with the lights on. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow outside my window sends my heart racing. I moved to a new apartment, far from where it all happened, but the fear followed me. The man was charged with breaking and entering, stalking, and attempted assault. But even with him behind bars, I can't shake the feeling that he's still watching me somehow. His words haunt me. This isn't over. I've tried to rebuild my life, but the paranoia has taken root. I avoid public transportation. I check my locks 3, sometimes 4 times before bed. And the cameras? They're still running, constantly monitoring, always watching. Some nights, I dream of him standing at the foot of my bed, smiling that same twisted smile. I wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding like a drum. Therapy helps, but only so much. I don't tell this story for sympathy. I tell it as a warning. Be careful who you talk to, even in passing, because sometimes the most innocent encounters can turn into your worst nightmare. And once someone decides to watch you, there's no telling when or if they'll stop. You know that feeling when you get a friend request from someone you went to high school with? That little spark of nostalgia? That's how it started with David Miller's request. I hadn't thought about him in 15 years. Quiet kid, always sat in the back of chemistry class. We barely spoke back then, but hey, everyone connects with old classmates online, right? His profile seemed normal enough. Family photos, vacation shots, the usual stuff. I clicked accept without thinking twice. He commented on my welcome post. "Great to reconnect, Sarah. You haven't changed a bit since senior year." Sweet, I thought. Looking back now, I should have noticed something was off about that comment. How did he know what I looked like now? His profile picture was a landscape shot, and all his photos were either nature scenes or group shots, where you couldn't quite make out faces. The messages started innocently. He'd comment on my posts about remembering the good old days in high school. But then he started mentioning specific details. The blue dress I wore to prom, my locker combination, the time I twisted my ankle in PE class. Things even I had forgotten about. I brushed it off, thinking he just had a really good memory. Then came the comment about my morning coffee run. "That new barista at Starbucks on 5th Street can never get your order right, huh? Double shot vanilla latte, no foam." I froze. I hadn't posted anything about Starbucks, ever. That's when the memories started flooding back. That familiar silhouette I'd been seeing in my peripheral vision, the feeling of being watched, the mysterious footsteps in the parking garage. It was like putting together a jigsaw puzzle where every new piece made my blood run colder. I started going through David's social media activity meticulously. His comments on my posts went back years, long before we reconnected. Different accounts, slightly different names, but the same writing pattern. He'd been there all along, hiding in plain sight. The more I dug, the worse it got. He'd comment about my cat Max before I even adopted him. "Black cats bring good luck," he wrote 3 days before I went to the shelter. He knew about my promotion before I announced it. "You'll do great in the new office." He posted the day before my boss called me in. I noticed other things too. Photos I'd never shared publicly, me at the farmer's market, walking in the park having dinner with friends, appeared in the backgrounds of his nature shots. Always blurry, always distant, but unmistakably me. In one photo of a sunset, I could make out my bedroom window, reflected in a puddle. He'd been documenting my life like some twisted photographer, and I'd never noticed. The comments became more frequent, more personal. He'd reference conversations I'd had in private. "That red scarf your mom gave you for Christmas would look great with your new coat." I hadn't posted about either gift. Hope your headaches are getting better. After a doctor's appointment I'd told no one about. Each revelation felt like another stone in my stomach, weighing me down with the horrifying reality that my life had been under surveillance for years. My hands shaking, I started downloading all my social media data. Every login, every device, every connection. That's when I found them. Hundreds of login attempts from unknown devices. He'd been trying to access my accounts for years, but that wasn't the worst part. In my photo metadata, I found location tags I'd never added, dating back to 2018. Someone had been tracking my every move. I hired a cybersecurity expert, and what she found chilled me to my core. My phone had been cloned. Every text, every email, every photo I took was being mirrored to another device. The expert traced the signal to an IP address just 3 blocks from my apartment. "This isn't amateur stalking," she said, her face grave. "This person knows what they're doing." Going through my email drafts, we found messages I'd never written. Detailed notes about my daily routine, my preferences, my relationships. Times I left for work, which grocery store I visited, who I met for coffee. It was like reading a biography of my life written by someone who'd been watching from the shadows. The level of detail was staggering. He even knew which parking spot I preferred at the gym. The expert found something else, a hidden folder in my cloud storage, filled with surveillance photos. Me walking my dog, getting mail, sleeping through my bedroom window. Each photo named with the date and time. The most recent was from yesterday. My entire life had been curated, cataloged, and stored by someone who'd been pretending to be a distant memory. I decided to take control. I messaged David directly. "I know what you've been doing." His response came instantly. "Took you long enough, Sarah. I've been waiting for you to figure it out." My phone rang seconds later, a video call request from his account. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I answered. The face that appeared wasn't the David I remembered from high school. His eyes were different, intense, unblinking. "You know," he said, smiling, "I was there the day you chose your apartment. 3rd floor, corner unit, great view of the park. I knew it was perfect for you before you did." He held up his phone, showing a photo of me from that day, standing outside the building. "I've been helping you make decisions for years, Sarah. Guiding you, protecting you." My voice trembled as I spoke. "Why? We barely knew each other in school." His expression changed, darkened. "Barely knew each other? I sat behind you in 8 different classes. I learned your schedule by heart. I watched you fall in love with Michael Peterson, watched him break your heart. I was there for all of it. I've always been there." He leaned closer to the camera. "I know you better than anyone, Sarah. Better than you know yourself." As he spoke, notifications started flooding my phone. He was tagging me in hundreds of photos, all of them of me, spanning years. "See?" he whispered. "I've been building this gallery just for you. Every moment, every smile, every tear. You're my masterpiece." The police were useless. Without direct threats, "There's little we can do," they said. But David's behavior was escalating. He began leaving small gifts at my door. Copies of photos I'd lost years ago, old diary pages I thought I'd thrown away, notes from my first boyfriend. Each item proved how long he'd been watching, collecting, obsessing. Then the videos started appearing in my inbox. Security footage from stores I'd visited, traffic cam clips of my car, even drone footage of my parents' house. "Just keeping you safe," he'd write. "Someone has to." The timestamps showed some recordings were from just hours ago. He was getting bolder, closer. My friends started receiving messages too. Long emails detailing concerns about my well-being, filled with private information only a close friend should know. He was trying to isolate me, paint me as unstable. Several friends stopped returning my calls, unsure what to believe. Those who stuck by me received their own surveillance photos as warnings. One night I found my apartment door unlocked. Nothing was stolen, but things were slightly moved. A coffee cup turned around. A book shifted on the shelf. My bed made differently than I'd left it. He wanted me to know he could get in anytime. The police installed security cameras, but the footage would mysteriously corrupt every night. Technology can be so unreliable, David messaged me, adding a smiling emoji. Everything changed last Tuesday. I woke up to find my entire social media presence erased. Every account, every photo, every digital footprint. In their place was a single new profile, Sarah and David forever. The profile picture was a photo of me sleeping, taken that night. The bio read, "Every love story needs a narrator." I ran, packed a bag, and drove to a hotel, paid cash, used a fake name. But an hour later, my phone lit up with a photo of my hotel room door. "You forgot your charger," the message read. "I packed a spare in your blue suitcase, left pocket." He was right. It was there, neatly coiled, waiting. That's when I realized running wasn't the answer. He didn't just want to watch anymore. He wanted me to know I was being watched, wanted me to feel his presence every moment of every day. This confession isn't just a story, it's a warning. Right now, as I record this, I know he's watching. He's probably already downloading this video, adding it to his collection. To everyone watching this, check your digital footprint, look closer at those friend requests, and most importantly, trust your instincts, because sometimes that person from your past should stay there. David, I know you're watching this. You always are. But now, finally, everyone else is watching too. It all started with a routine. I was a barista at a cozy coffee shop downtown. The morning rush was always chaotic, but there was one customer who stood out not because he did anything out of the ordinary, but because he was so predictable. Every single day, at 8:15 sharp, he'd walk in, order a caramel latte with 2 pumps of vanilla, and sit by the window. He never missed a day, never changed his order, and never spoke more than a few words. Caramel latte, 2 pumps of vanilla. That was it. At first, I thought nothing of it. People are creatures of habit, right? But the more I observed him, the stranger it felt. He always carried the same worn-out leather bag, always wore the same gray scarf, and always left at exactly 8:45. No sooner, no later. He'd sit there, sipping his drink, staring out the window as if he were waiting for something. Or someone. One day, I caught him looking at me. Not in a casual, passing glance kind of way, but with an intensity that made my skin crawl. His eyes locked onto mine for just a moment too long, and I had to look away. I laughed it off. Maybe I was overthinking it, but deep down, something about him unsettled me. I told myself it was just his rigid routine, just a harmless quirk. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than met the eye. The day I handed in my notice at that cafe, I felt relieved. I was moving to a new coffee shop across town. A fresh start, new faces, new routines, but that relief was short-lived. Because on my first day at the new job, he was there. Seeing him walk into the new cafe froze me in place. I remember the exact moment, the way the little bell above the door jingled, the soft hum of the espresso machine behind me. And then, there he was, stepping in like he belonged there. Same gray scarf, same leather bag, same unnerving calm. My chest tightened, and my hands trembled as I gripped the counter. He walked up to me, his face completely unreadable. "Caramel latte, 2 pumps of vanilla," he said, his voice steady and detached, as if he'd been ordering it from me at this place for years. My heart raced as I tried to compose myself. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe he liked this chain of coffee shops. That's what I told myself anyway. But then I started to notice things. Subtle, almost imperceptible things. He never looked at the menu. He always chose the same seat, directly across from the counter, where he had a perfect line of sight to me. And, once again, he left at exactly 8:45. It was like he'd transplanted his old routine into my new world, and no one else seemed to think it was strange. Over the next few weeks, his presence became unbearable. I'd feel his gaze on me every time I turned my back. It wasn't just in the cafe anymore either. I started seeing glimpses of him outs across the street from my apartment, standing by the bus stop I used every morning. Always at a distance, always with that same unnerving composure. I tried telling my coworkers, but they brushed it off. Maybe he just really likes the coffee, they said. But I knew better. This wasn't about the coffee. It was about me. One morning I decided to confront him. My nerves were on edge, but I couldn't live with the paranoia anymore. As soon as he ordered his usual drink, I mustered all my courage. "Excuse me," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Have we met before?" For a moment, he just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. "I've been coming here for weeks," he said, his tone calm, almost soothing. "I thought you would remember me." The way he said it sent chills down my spine. Remember him? I remembered everything about him, but not in the way he implied. My instincts screamed at me to back away, but I forced a polite smile and handed him his drink. He walked to his usual seat without another word. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the interaction in my head, the way his smile lingered just a little too long, the way his words seemed to carry a double meaning. Desperate for answers, I decided to dig a little deeper. I searched through old receipts and customer records from my previous job. Nothing. It was like he didn't exist. But then I found something odd. A coworker had snapped a group photo during my last week at the old cafe. In the background, barely visible through the window, was the man. He wasn't just a customer. He was watching me. Always watching. I felt sick. My hands shook as I stared at the photo. This wasn't coincidence. This was something else entirely. After that discovery, I couldn't shake the feeling that my every move was being watched. I began to notice him everywhere. At the grocery store, on the subway, standing at the corner of the street as I walked home. Each time, he'd vanish before I could confront him, like a shadow that disappeared when you turned on the light. I started keeping a journal, documenting every sighting. I even tried changing my routines. I'd leave for work an hour earlier, take different routes home, avoid places I thought he might be. But it didn't matter. He always found me. One evening, I decided to test him. I left the cafe earlier than usual and walked to a nearby park. It was quiet, the kind of place where you'd notice someone following you. Sure enough, there he was, lingering by a lamppost. My heart pounded as I quickened my pace, hoping to lose him in the maze of paths. But every time I turned a corner, he was there. Finally, I stopped and spun around. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty park. But he didn't respond. He just stood there, his face shadowed, his eyes glinting in the dim light. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. I thought that would be the end of it, but it only got worse. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. It simply read, "You can't escape me." The note was the final straw. I decided to take matters into my own hands. If the police wouldn't help, I'd handle it myself. I started carrying pepper spray and set up a camera in my apartment. I was determined to catch him in the act, to prove to myself, to everyone else, that I wasn't imagining things. Days turned into weeks, and the tension grew unbearable. He'd stop coming into the cafe but would still appear in other places, always keeping his distance. The camera footage showed nothing unusual. No one had entered my apartment. No one had followed me inside. But I knew he was out there, watching, waiting. One night I woke up to the sound of tapping. It was faint, like fingers drumming against glass. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. Slowly, I turned to face the window. There he was, standing outside, his face inches from the glass, his eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time, I saw something in them that made my blood run cold. Obsession. Pure, unrelenting obsession. I grabbed the pepper spray and ran to the window, but by the time I got there, he was gone. The only trace he left was a single handprint on the glass, smeared as if he'd pressed his palm against it before disappearing into the night. The next morning, I decided to leave the city. I packed my bags and booked a one-way ticket to a place far enough that he'd never find me, or so I thought. As I boarded the train, I finally felt a sense of relief. The thought of starting over in a new town was comforting, but that relief was short-lived. Halfway through the journey, I decided to grab a coffee from the train's dining car. As I turned the corner, I froze. There he was, sitting at a table, his gray scarf draped neatly over the back of his chair. He looked up and smiled. "Caramel latte, 2 pumps of vanilla," he said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Panic set in. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair as I tried to put as much distance between us as possible. But no one else seemed to notice him. The other passengers didn't even glance in his direction. It was as if he existed only for me. I locked myself in the bathroom, my breathing ragged. When I finally worked up the courage to step out, the dining car was empty. He was gone. Or maybe he'd never been there at all. Now every time I hear the jingling of a bell or the hiss of a coffee machine, I'm reminded of him, of his smile, of his words. I left that town, that job, that life. But deep down, I know it doesn't matter where I go. He'll always find me. It started on a chilly autumn night, around 2 a.m. I was jolted awake by the shrill ring of my phone. My heart raced as I answered, expecting an emergency, but instead, I was greeted by silence. Then, a raspy voice broke through, slow and deliberate. "Nice curtains in the living room. Red suits you." I froze. How could anyone know that? My house was locked, curtains drawn, and I lived alone. Shaking, I stammered, "Who is this?" But the line went dead. I dismissed it as a prank and tried to sleep, though my pounding heart wouldn't let me. The second call came an hour later. This time, the voice described the photo frames on my mantel frames only visible from inside the house. A cold chill crept up my spine. I checked every lock, peered outside, but saw no one. My mind raced with questions. Was someone watching me? Were they inside already? Sleep was impossible now, as paranoia clawed at me. My house, my safe haven, felt like a cage closing in. The calls didn't stop. Night after night, the stranger called, describing my home in chilling detail. "The crack on the wall near your hallway. It's deep, isn't it?" Their voice rasped one evening. I hadn't even noticed that crack myself until they mentioned it. Every word was like a sharp blade, cutting through my sense of safety. I stopped turning on the lights, hoping they wouldn't see me. I covered windows with blankets, avoided standing near open spaces, and even taped my phone's camera. But no matter what I did, they knew. One night they chuckled softly before saying, "I like the way you pace the room when you're nervous." My blood turned cold. Were they watching me now? I grabbed a kitchen knife, my shaky hand gripping the handle tightly, and started checking every inch of the house. Nothing. No footprints in the yard, no cameras, no signs of intrusion. Yet the calls continued, their accuracy horrifying. Fear became my companion. I barely slept, barely ate. I wondered, was I going mad? Or was this stranger more than just a person? Then the calls took a darker turn. They began describing me. "That tear in your sweater? It looks old. You should really throw it out," they said one night, their tone disturbingly casual. Another time they whispered, "You've been biting your nails again, haven't you?" I stared at my hands, trembling, nails chewed down to the skin. They laughed an unhinged, bone-chilling sound that echoed in my head long after the call ended. My mind spiraled. Were they inside my house, watching me from the shadows? I searched endlessly, pulling apart furniture, tearing through closets, but every room was empty. I called the police, but with no evidence of a break-in and no way to trace the blocked number, they couldn't help. They suggested it might be a prank or someone hacking into my devices. I knew better. This wasn't some harmless joke. Whoever this was, they knew me. They knew things no one could. And then came the most chilling call yet. "I'm closer than you think." The final straw came on a stormy night. Thunder roared, and the power went out, plunging my house into darkness. I lit candles, my hands shaking so badly the flame flickered. My phone rang again, and I hesitated before answering. The voice was louder, clearer this time. "You look scared," they said. "Why? I'm not in your house yet." The line went dead. That single word, yet, shattered what little composure I had left. I screamed into the empty house, begging them to leave me alone. My voice echoed back, met only by silence. Every noise, every creak of the old wooden floors felt amplified. I grabbed the knife again and sat in the corner of my bedroom, back pressed against the wall, eyes darting to every shadow. Hours passed. My phone stayed silent, but that silence was louder than any scream, more terrifying than the calls themselves. They had broken me. I was no longer sure if I was being watched or if I was losing my mind entirely. Morning came, and I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag, determined to leave and never come back. But as I reached the front door, I froze. Tucked into the doorframe was a photographer picture of me, taken the night before. I was standing in the living room, staring at the window, knife in hand, my breath caught in my throat. The stranger wasn't just watching me, they had been inside. They had stood, right there, close enough to snap this photo, while I was oblivious. The realization sent my mind spiraling. My sanctuary had been violated. I called the police again, and when they arrived, they found signs of forced entry I had somehow missed, but the intruder was long gone. All they left behind was the photo and a single note scrawled on the back. "You can't run." That's when I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I moved far away, to a new city where no one knew me. I changed my number, avoided social media, and kept my life as private as possible. For a while, it worked. I started to feel safe again. But safety is an illusion. One night, months later, my phone rang. The number was blocked. My stomach dropped, and I stared at the screen, paralyzed. Slowly, I picked up, heart pounding. There was silence on the other end. Then, that familiar raspy voice whispered, "Miss me?" My body went numb. I dropped the phone, but the sound of their laughter echoed in my head. They had found me. No matter where I went, no matter what I did, they would always find me. The terror wasn't in the call, it was in knowing I'd never escape. And as I write this, I know they're still watching, maybe even reading this now.